Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this talk. We're very excited to have you all here and very excited to have Theda on campus. My name is Zach. I am one of the interns for this year. I'm the arts administration intern. And yeah, I'm just going to do a little blurb and then we're going to get right to it. Theda Sandiford, an acclaimed self-taught fiber and installation artist hailing from St. Croix, US, VI, is celebrated for her award-winning artist practice. Drawing inspiration from the profound impact of racial trauma, Theda melds various fibers with an array of found materials through the art of free-form weaving, coiling, knotting, and jewelry-making techniques. Her meticulously gathered materials, combined with community contributions, serve as a testament to collective memory, transforming into social fabric. This intertwines contemporary issues and personal narratives, fostering a rich tapestry of interconnected stories. At the core of Theda's creative process lies communal art making. She orchestrates multidisciplinary experiences that unite individuals, sound, and artistry to cultivate a sanctuary for exploring themes of equity, inclusion, sustainability, and personal well-being. Free Your Mind is a public textile art endeavor led by artist Theda Sandiford with the objective of gathering, showcasing, embedding, and liberating personal narratives surrounding microaggressions through a multi-sensory installation. This installation was set up on Touchstone's campus on May 17th, 2024, and was taken down on September 20th for documentation. Theda will be presenting and exhibiting Free Your Mind at the American Folklore Society Annual Conference from November 6th to November 9th of this year in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and will also be presenting at the 2024 Textile Society of American Symposium titled Shifts and Strands, Rethinking the Possibilities and Potentials of Textiles. During this virtual event, Theda will be discussing how Free Your Mind uses textiles and memory to convey emotions and create healing, thereby pushing the boundaries of traditional textile art. We here at Touchstone would like to thank the Arts Equity and Education Fund for their support of this project. And we're very excited to be with Theda today and have greatly enjoyed having her on campus for the last 2 weeks. So without further ado, here's Theda.
Wow, that was really good. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. All right, I'm used to having 2 screens. This is my second screen on the paper. Okay, so first of all, welcome and thank you everyone for being here. And I want to thank Touchstone for inviting me. I also want to thank Dean for his care and commitment to this project. And I also want to thank you for your time. And I believe that time is a gift. So thank you for this gift of your time. Some of you may take offense to the conversation we're having about microaggressions and implicit bias, and this is okay. One of the criticism discourse about microaggressions gets is that our society has become too hypersensitive and that casual remarks are now blown out of proportion. Most conversations about implicit bias are unproductive because people are extremely sensitive to being perceived as racist, sexist, homophobic, ageist, and add any ist or ism at the end. Bringing awareness to the conversations and actions that make us uncomfortable is really what Free Your Mind is all about. Free Your Mind is a safe place to explore this dialogue. Okay, let's see, click. Yes, it's working. As a child, I was exposed to old masters and modernists, and my parents were big collectors of African art and antiques. They had a passion for Picasso, Salvador Dali, Marc Chagall, and Frank Lloyd Wright in particular. My mom and I would drive all over the Northeast to see Frank Lloyd Wright houses whenever there was an open house. So when I told her I was coming here to Touchstone and she knew Falling Water was only 10 miles away, she was very excited. That's why I'm like, why isn't she on the Zoom? I learned at a young age to look and truly see. I was encouraged to share how art made me feel. And these are foundational skills of my art practice today. My art education took place at home. As a young lady, I learned to sew from my Polish maternal grandmother. She believed every proper young lady should know how to darn socks and sew a button. and she gave bonus points for being able to pattern and construct my own clothes. Also at this time, I was reconstructing thrift store finds into new garments, and I began my practice of upcycling textiles and found materials. I learned macrame embroidery from my mom, who is also my Girl Scout troop leader. And I still use many of the skills I learned as a Girl Scout in my practice today. And these include basket weaving, gardening, and foraging. Okay. My dad's side of the family is from Barbados and Trinidad. And my Aunt Terry was well known for her design and skill in making West Indian Day Parade Carnival costumes. So as a teen, I spent my summer sewing sequences on G-strings and gluing down rhinestones and making feathered wings to help her fulfill her orders for the yearly Labor Day parade in Brooklyn. At the time, I did not appreciate these skills. My cousins and I used to call it Terry's sweatshop. But today, these are the tools I use the most in my art practice. And my love of color, glitter, gold, over-the-top bling bling, all comes from my Caribbean heritage. So growing up as a biracial child in the 70s was very lonely. When my family moved to the suburbs for better schools, I was thrust into a homogenized environment where there were no Black families, let alone blended families. So this was the first time I learned I was different from other kids. Daily comments about having big hair and being placed at the back of the class because my hair was too distracting for other children. Being told I was adopted because my mom is white, or my teachers and classmates repeatedly butchering my name on purpose. It's Theda, not Theta, by the way. Being kicked out of my friend Gina Scordianci's house when her father came home and saw that I was Black. She was told she could not be friends with me any longer. And then she ignored me in school after that. I was 5. I inferred from all these experiences that I was different and unworthy. And though many years have passed and I know better, I still battle these feelings to this day. So I often feel powerless and unable to confront subtle acts of bias. And I find that when I do speak up, I face the consequence of being labeled an angry Black woman. And the angry Black woman trope is a really harmful stereotype, and it portrays Black women as irrationally angry, aggressive, and hostile. It dismisses legitimate emotions and concerns and reducing voices to caricatures of anger. This trope is also used to silence and discredit Black women, invalidating our experiences of injustice and perpetuating racial and gender biases. It reinforces the notion that Black women's emotions are exaggerated or unwarranted, making it harder for me to express myself without facing negative stereotypes. And so for years, I've kept my mouth shut and swallowed the pain. In 2004, I transitioned from talk therapy to art therapy to process this long-held trauma. And that's when I learned how to channel my emotions into art and heal these wounds. Working with my hands in a repetitive manner allows me to enter a deep meditation that disappears anxiety. And as I delved deeper into long-held trauma and found relief, I began to think about what the transformative potential of art, not only for me, but what other people could get for themselves by interacting with my work. I asked myself, what if, instead of creating a traditional art piece, my work could focus on shaping a social idea or experience as the final outcome? This inquiry has become the core motivator of my art practice. So my practice is centered and concerned with social justice and subtle human interactions, with an aim to generate dialogue, awareness, and ultimately tangible social change. Have you ever been followed around a shop with a security guard while you were browsing in a store, or been asked if you live here while standing in your own garage, or have someone touch your hair without asking permission first. These are all microaggressions. And before I moved to St. Croix, I had interactions like this every single day. Following around the store and asking me to validate myself in my own garage to prove I belong sends a clear message that I am not welcome. And touching my hair without asking is a violation of my autonomy. It reinforces racial stereotypes and objectifies my body. It disregards the ownership of my own body. It treats my hair as exotic or other and reduces my identity to curiosity rather than respecting my personal space and autonomy. This action, often done without permission, perpetuates power imbalances and reflects a disregard for consent. And while it may seem harmless, it carries historical connotations of racial oppression, where Black bodies were treated as property or spectacle, making it an act that can feel invasive and disrespectful. So the reality is microaggressions are not so micro in terms of their impact. They should be taken seriously, and because at the core, they signal disrespect and reflect inequality. So the research is clear. Seemingly innocuous statements can have an impact on one's physical and mental health, especially over the course of time. Increased rates of depression, prolonged stress, trauma result in physical concerns like headaches, high blood pressure, difficulty sleeping. For me, the weight of these interactions has manifested in insomnia, feelings of powerlessness, and a profound sense of self-doubt, along with the expectation of failure. It's quite the combo. And I'm exhausted. It makes me feel like I'm being overwhelmed by a mosquito swarm, bites upon bites that make me want to scratch my skin raw, like Godzilla here. Microaggressions and implicit bias are closely related concepts that often intersect and reinforce one another. Implicit bias refers to unconscious attitudes, stereotypes, and associations that people hold about different groups. These biases operate automatically and involuntarily, often without the individual's awareness. They can influence perceptions, actions, and decisions in subtle ways. Implicit bias comes from the subconscious associations and stereotypes we form based on our own experiences, societal influences, and cultural conditioning. These biases develop over time through exposure to media, family beliefs, education, and our social environments. And they're often reinforced by structural inequalities and dominant cultural narratives that privilege certain groups while marginalizing others. Because implicit biases operate below our conscious awareness, they often reflect societal norms, even when individuals consciously reject prejudice. So, microaggressions, on the other hand, stem from underlying implicit biases, stereotypes, and societal conditioning. And people may not even be consciously aware of them either. These are subtle, often unintentional comments or actions that reflect ingrained prejudices and power dynamics that exist within our society. Microaggressions are shaped by cultural norms, media portrayals, and historical inequalities, which perpetuate assumptions about marginalized groups. They occur when individuals act on these biases, often assuming and expressing ideas about race, gender, sexuality, or other identities in a way that reinforces stereotypes, even if unintentionally. So, for example, a person might unconsciously associate negative traits with a racial or ethnic group, and then make a comment that reflects this bias, even if they did not consciously hold prejudiced beliefs. They can influence behavior and judgment in subtle ways, leading to discriminatory actions and decisions, even in the absence of overt prejudice. Despite seeming harmless, microaggressions can reflect deeper systematic inequalities, and that can cause harm by invalidating, alienating, and marginalizing the experiences of others. Now, most people are familiar with explicit bias, because overt prejudice is explicit bias, and this is expressed directly. Explicit bias reflects our conscious beliefs and behaviors that individuals hold about particular groups or individuals. These biases are deliberate and often expressed openly through discriminatory actions, language, and policies. Unlike implicit bias, explicit bias is intentional. So this example of the sign marking the white door telling color to enter through the rear is a perfect example of this. So Free Your Mind started in 2021 as a social justice project aimed to collect and expose and release personal narratives around microaggressions. So far, the project has traveled to New York City, Seattle, Washington, Miami, Florida, a bunch of places in Pennsylvania, Benton Harbor, Michigan, Chicago, New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, and it also exists online for anyone to participate. So individuals are invited to share a personal experience with implicit bias or microaggression and release this story. So Free Your Mind exposes implicit and unconscious bias to provide a release for both the participant and the viewer. So it's your participation that makes the work come alive with possibility for transformation. Many participants tell me they feel seen or acknowledged while interacting with this work. Some say they see statements they may have made without realizing their impact upon others. I have seen statements that I have said without realizing the impact on others. We all probably have. And I've heard people say they've never had an experience with microaggressions. And so I'm here to say BS, because there's literally no one that hasn't experienced it. This doesn't, so if you're a white male, you might have implicit bias related to what society thinks you should be doing for a living, or how much money you should have, or where you should live. So this is very prevalent in our society. So implicit bias and microaggressions are attitudes and beliefs that occur outside of your conscious awareness. And we don't often realize we're doing this, okay, myself included. And a lot of times you may not realize or believe something you said or did was harmful. But these are the very moments that have been shared on more than 5,000 story ribbons so far. Okay, so my goal is to take this project to all 50 states. This year, the project's been at Touchstone Center for Crafts and at the Delaware Contemporary, and then it's going to go to New Mexico and then be part of this textile symposium. As a project travels, I'm noticing common themes clustered in specific neighborhoods in the story ribbons. So far, I've identified and sorted the story ribbons into nearly 75 different categories of implicit bias. All right, so the top categories nationwide: implicit racial bias, racial stereotyping, exoticism, assumption of foreignness, language bias, gender bias, sexual harassment, ableism, ageism, minimization, tokenism, and anti-Semitism. But let's talk about what I specifically uncovered at Touchstone. Okay. Here's some of the rivets I saw. Okay, so out of the 87 story ribbons shared at Touchstone, there were 46 different types of biases represented. And I've broken down the percentages for the top ones. Everything else that's below would be in the 1 percentile. But gender bias is number 1, followed by body shaming, heteronormative bias, minimization, ageism, racial stereotyping, privilege, and tokenism. Those are the ones we're going to specifically talk about. So, gender bias often manifests as unequal treatment, opportunities, or assumptions about abilities based on gender. It can be conscious or unconscious and can affect both men or women, although women are more commonly disadvantaged in many contexts. So an example could be a workplace scenario where a man and a woman with the same qualifications experience and experience apply for a promotion, but the man is selected because of the assumption he is more assertive and leadership oriented, while the woman may be passed over with the assumption she is less ambitious or may have other commitments due to potential family responsibilities. So ways to spot gender bias, and this is the 11% of the conversation that was uncovered here. You can review language. Are the descriptions of men and women in evaluations or conversations different? Are men described as driven and women as emotional for similar behaviors? We can question assumptions. Are decisions made based on stereotypes? Are men better at tech and women more nurturing? And be conscious when these stereotypes might be influencing decisions. Analyze data, which I hope, when I get all this over to you, Dean, you can look at. Look at patterns in hiring, promotion, and salaries. Are men constantly receiving higher pay or advancement opportunities? If so, this can signal gender bias. So some of the comments that came up here, or I've had men take credit for the programs I've built. I'm a woman. I've had to share credit with my male colleague, even on solo projects, while my male principal never had to share credit with me on his solo projects. You're just a girl, too stupid to do anything. Oh, you like theater? You must be gay. Female teaching university level of gymnastics from a well-known men's coach. You shouldn't be teaching men. Women in general are inferior beings. This is what people wrote. So how do you correct gender bias? You can actively challenge it. When you notice gender-based assumptions, you call it out, even if it's subtle. Encourage decision makers to focus on qualifications and performance, not stereotypes. Foster inclusivity, create environments where both men and women are equally encouraged to speak up, contribute ideas, and pursue leadership roles. And or implement blind evaluations, or in recruitment or promotions, remove identifying information like names or gender from resumes to solely focus on qualifications. I don't ask people to sign their ribbons. I have to infer whether it's a man or woman based on the handwriting or any context. Sometimes people do sign and tell me I'm a woman or I am Asian or what have you, but removing that allows you to kind of step aside from your own assumptions. I found it incredibly helpful. Okay, body shaming. This is the act of criticizing or mocking someone for their physical appearance, often targeting aspects like weight, size, shape, or even features. It can take various forms, like subtle to outright insults, and it can significantly impact someone's self-esteem, mental health, and body image. One common example would be, you're too skinny, you need to eat more, or you put on a lot of weight lately, shouldn't you be on a diet? Or are you going to eat all that? It's often presented as concern, but these type of comments are hurtful and often based on societal expectations rather than genuine care for a person's well-being. So this is 5.8% of the conversation here, Touchstone. And how do you spot it? Pay attention to language, subtle digs or concern trolling. That's a form of concern about somebody's body is a form of shaming. I'm just worried about your health, someone might start it with. Seemingly harmless jokes or observations that do have harmful effects. And be aware of assumptions about someone's worth, health, or habits solely based on their appearances, rooted in bias. I was seeing a video on TikTok the other day, and it was a large cheerleader that was doing splits and the legs up and doing the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. I don't know if you saw that on Netflix. So I watched it, but doing the entire Thunderstruck routine. And I was just like, how the hell did she do that? Right. And then I had to check myself. Oh, I'm assuming because she's larger, she wouldn't be able to. It's like, this is how it just comes up. Notice societal pressures, media, culture, and peer groups that may enforce the idea that only certain body types are acceptable, and that leads to body shaming for those that don't fit those standards. So here's some of the conversations that came up here. You're so skinny, you should eat something. Have you lost weight? You look great. Are you going to eat all that? You're too skinny. It doesn't look good. Are you pregnant? When are you due? So how to correct it? Avoid commenting on appearance. If it's not necessary, avoid making any remarks about somebody's body. Instead, focus on non-appearance related qualities like kindness, intelligence, or creativity. We're all artists. We can all talk about somebody's creativity and find something good to say. Encourage body positivity. Promote the idea that all bodies are worthy and valuable, regardless of shape or size. And support others embracing their uniqueness. Challenge harmful norms. If you hear somebody body shaming, either intentionally or unintentionally, speak up and challenge the behavior in a respectful way. So you can educate yourself and others about the diversity of healthy body types. Self-reflection. Consider your own biases and past actions that have contributed to body shaming, and reflect how cultural standards of beauty have shaped your views, and actively work to unlearn those harmful notions. Okay, this is a big one. This comes up in a lot of places. Heteronormative bias refers to the assumption that heterosexuality, or being attracted to the opposite gender, is the norm and the default sexual orientation, and that gender identity aligns strictly with male and female roles as defined by society. Okay, so this manifests in societal norms, institutions, interpersonal interactions, and often in marginalized LGBTQ plus individuals by reinforcing the idea that their identities or relationships are other or abnormal. They are not. The common example occurs when people automatically assume that a man has a wife or a girlfriend, or that a woman has a husband or boyfriend, without considering that they might be in a same-sex relationship. So for instance, asking a man, what does your wife do? Without knowing their relationship status or gender preference, that's a reflection of this bias. So this is 5.8% of the conversation here on Touchstone this summer. And how do you spot it? So language assumptions. Assuming all couples are male, female, using he, she pronouns without asking first. I had a good conversation about pronouns this week with Ren. So I got some education on that myself. Noticing when heterosexual relationships or gender binaries are assumed in conversation or in the media or in policy. Exclusion in forms or policies. This is in legal or institutional forms of documents that only offer male or female as gender options. Referring to parents only as mother and father. That these are all examples of heteronormative bias. So our mainstream media often depicts heterosexual relationships as the default, and LGBTQ plus relationships as less represented or portrayed as different. So here's some of the conversations that came up here. You are an artist, you must be gay. That haircut makes you look like a bull dyke. So you're into girls now? I prefer that my daughter bring home a man. What will the neighbors think when what my parents said when I came out as queer? So how to correct this behavior? Use inclusive language, neutral terms like partner, until someone shares more specific information. Ask for people's pronouns rather than assuming based on appearance. Challenge assumptions. So we see this all the time. Question them. Ask whether they're inclusive or diverse of sexual orientations and gender identities. Advocate for inclusive spaces. So encourage workplaces, schools, or communities to use forms, policies, or language that are inclusive of all identities and orientations. And this could include having more than 2 gender options on forms. So not just check one box. Educate yourself and others. I'm constantly educating myself about this. And be willing to learn, listen, and support those whose identities fall outside traditional norms. Minimization. This is one I experience quite a bit, and it refers to the tendency to downplay or dismiss experiences, feelings, or challenges that others feel, especially related to issues like discrimination, mental health, or trauma. It can manifest in conversations where someone's concerns are not taken seriously, often leading to feelings of invalidation or marginalization. So it often stems from discomfort, misunderstanding, or the belief that other people's challenges are exaggerated or unimportant. So an example that this is that, if I have a conversation about racism with someone, they'll say, oh, I don't think it's that bad anymore. Everyone's equal now. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? So this dismisses the reality of an individual's experience, suggesting that their concerns are either overblown or irrelevant in today's society. And so how do you spot it? All right, 58% of the conversation here. So notice dismissive language like, it's not a big deal, or you're overreacting, or you're just too sensitive. See, these are common indicators that someone's concerns are being minimized. Look for avoidance. When someone changes the subject or refuses to engage in difficult conversations about race, gender, mental health, or other sensitive topics, it might signal a tendency to minimize. Consider emotional invalidation. When feelings are being brushed aside or not taken seriously, that often indicates minimization. So, for example, responding to someone's feelings of depressions with just cheer up, it's all in your head, that's a form of minimization. So here's some of the conversations. You were just overreacting. It's probably just anxiety. You're not the only one with feelings. That didn't really happen to you. We matter, we care. So how to correct this behavior? Listen actively when someone shares a concern or experience, and take time to listen without interrupting, judging, or minimizing their feelings, and acknowledge their experience as valid. Validate emotions instead of downplaying and saying things like, I hear you, that must be really hard for you. Show empathy and understanding. Avoid comparison, like don't compare somebody else's challenges to your own, saying things like, it could be worse. This minimizes someone's feelings. Educate yourself on systematic issues. Understanding the complexities of issues of racism and sexism and mental health can help you avoid minimizing other people's experiences, increasing awareness and empathy. And if the topic makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself why. Recognizing that you feel the urge to dismiss somebody's feelings can help you spot minimization bias in yourself. So ageism refers to stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination against individuals based on their age. It can affect people of all ages, most commonly directed at adults. It occurs in interpersonal reactions, workplace, healthcare settings, even media portrayals, often leading to exclusion, marginalization, negative assumptions about someone's capabilities based on their age. So there's an assumption that you might be too old to adapt or too resistant to change. And so this often happens in workplaces, even though an employee might be fully capable of learning new skills. So how do you spot it? It's 4.7% of the conversation here. Pay attention to stereotypes. Older adults are often labeled as slow, stuck in their ways, or technologically challenged. I started to notice this conversation coming up for me when I stopped dyeing my hair and just let it go gray. Now I went prematurely gray at 28. I have been dyeing my hair ever since. But then several years ago, I said, I'm not going to do it anymore. The minute I stopped doing it is when all of a sudden that conversation, I was like, oh, okay. And then there's a similar stereotype with young people, right? Because it goes both ways, that young people are inexperienced or immature, right? So they get dinged on the other side for being younger. So you got to notice exclusionary language like, older persons being talked over, dismissed because their views are viewed as outdated, or even on the younger side, oh, well, you don't have enough experience to have an opinion about that. There's media and advertising representations for this. So like older portrayals of older adults are solely focused on fragility, incompetence, their decline. Again, this is a harmful stereotype. So some of the conversations that came up here, you're just old. Since you're older, you don't understand the seeming growing invisibility of aging women and the lack of grace for our aging bodies. We are beautiful. I'm now 62 years old and never expected to live so long. So you can see how it's even internalized for somebody else believing things about themselves. So you can challenge the assumptions that older people can't handle technology. Okay, my mom definitely can't handle tech. Or that younger people are too impulsive, and recognize that these stereotypes prevent people from being evaluated based on their individual capabilities and experiences. Or involve all groups equally. Make sure older and younger voices are heard and respected in decision-making processes. And avoid automatically assigning tasks to people based on age-based assumptions, like, I can lift some things. I may choose not to, but I can lift it. Don't assume that I can't. Or foster intergenerational understanding. This is like collaboration between groups and mentorship between older and younger people. People can learn from each other. And it really just helps breaks down these biases. And then being mindful of like language, things like over the hill or past their prime, or too green. This is language that's very common in how we speak. And these are things that are fall into this category. Okay, racial stereotyping. So these stereotypes often simplify and are inaccurate generalizations that can perpetuate harmful biases, discrimination, or inequity. Some racial stereotypes can be positive. Asians are good at math. That has come up on at least 30 different ribbons in the past from other locations. Or negative, Black people are prone to violence. So regardless of intent, they reduce individuals to preconceived notions and erase their individuality. So an employer can assume that an applicant for a certain ethnic background is not a good fit for consumer-facing role due to perceptions around their accent or communication style. So this is all assumption rooted in racial bias, and it unfairly limits opportunities based on stereotypes rather than actual qualifications. So 4.7% of the conversation here, Touchstone, language cues things that you can watch out for. People like you always, ... Your kind of people. These statements often indicate that a person is being judged based on racial stereotypes rather than their individual merit. Expectations based on race. Someone assumes someone is skilled or not skilled in a particular area based on their racial background. That's a form of stereotyping. Media portrayals, many films, television shows, news outlets reinforce racial stereotypes by depicting certain groups in limited or exaggerated roles. We can see this very much so in our presidential election right now. So, do you play basketball? You're the whitest Black person. I went to a private high school. Again, these are all statements that were here at Touchstone. It's weird you're good at class because you're Black. Stigmatizing and harassing people on looks while being ignorant to learning and understanding why someone looks or acts that way. Someone just describing the experience. So how do we correct it? We avoid generalizations and we get to know people as individuals rather than making assumptions about them based on their race or ethnicity. And when you find yourself making a broad statement, reflect on whether it's based on a stereotype. Challenge stereotypes in conversation. So if someone makes a stereotypical comment about a racial group, challenge it with facts or acts for clarification. And encourage conversation that avoids reducing people to simple labels. You can diversify your source of information. So if you broaden your perspectives through reading, watching, listening to media that portrays different racial groups in nuanced and diverse ways, that combat narrow and one-dimensional portrayals of that group. So many of these racial stereotypes operate on an unconscious level. So that's why implicit bias training and conversations like this for self-reflection are really helpful to address and notice these things. So privilege. So this often operates invisibly, benefiting those who possess it while disadvantaging those who do not. And it's important to note that privilege doesn't mean an individual hasn't worked hard or faced challenges. It simply means that in certain cases, they benefited from social structures that provide advantages to certain groups. So if we think about racial privilege, many societies, white individuals benefit from systematic advantages, such as less discrimination in job hiring, fewer negative assumptions about their behavior, and greater representation in the media and leadership position. And so while an example would be a white person is less likely to be racially profiled by law enforcement compared to a person of color. So how do you spot it? Okay, 3.5% of the conversation here at Touchstone. So privileged groups have greater access to quality education, healthcare, job opportunities, or housing, often without realizing that others face systematic barriers to the same opportunities. Facts. Invisibility of barriers. Privilege can make the struggles of others seem less visible. Someone with economic privilege may not understand how the lack of affordable childcare affects a working class parent, simply because they haven't faced that barrier themselves. Assumptions about what is normal. If a group's experience is seen as the default or normal, it can erase or marginalize other perspectives. So if everyone has the same access to technology or job networks, that's an assumption that is a form of privilege. So how is it shown up here? Let us live in peace. Okay. Someone actually wrote that self-segregation by groups, religion, race, gender, politics, that was a microaggression, and that you are important and loved. Okay. Yes, guys, that really actually is privilege. So acknowledging and recognizing that privilege exists and considering how it operates in your life, that's important. And reflect on whether there are aspects of your identity that have been granted unearned advantages. Listen to the experiences of marginalized groups without defensiveness. Acknowledge their challenges and struggles without attempting to minimize or dismiss them. Privilege can be used to amplify the voice of marginalized people. Sometimes people with racial privilege can challenge racial stereotypes and advocate for policies that promote equity and inclusion in their community. Now, I don't know if many of you know, my husband is white. So if he notices things, he's like, let me use my privilege right now. So I'm so grateful for that, because I'm like, I'm just getting mad over here. And I know the angry Black woman trope is going to come up. And the minute he sees my eye twitching, he just knows, let me step in and have this conversation. So I am very grateful for that. We can support systematic change and advocate for policies that address inequality, equitable hiring practices, access to education, and healthcare for underserved communities. This really shows up a lot in healthcare, guys. And being mindful of our language and assumptions. I mean, it's not everyone has the same access to resources and opportunities. Okay, tokenism, and we're almost at the end. So this involves appointing or anointing a small number of individuals from an underrepresented group with the appearance of equality, without giving them the same opportunities, influence, or resources as their peers. I experience tokenism all the time. They're like, well, you're here, like as the example of, we're not racist, you're here. And I'm like, yeah, where's everybody else? And so this is an example where you kind of put a person of color or woman on a leadership team, but then don't give this individual any decision-making power or influence, and then make no other organizational efforts to increase diversity or address workplace inequalities. I've experienced this time and time again in my career. So this is like check boxing. I literally had a boss tell me, I checked 2 boxes. You're a woman and you're a person of color. I was like, and I'm supposed to feel good about that? Okay, so tokenism, 3.5% of the conversation. So how do you spot it? A lack of meaningful inclusion. Look around the room. If you don't see the diversity, that's tokenism is likely in play. Overemphasis on a person's identity. If someone's repeatedly held up as the face of diversity, without a broader commitment to inclusivity and support people from underrepresented groups, red flag, tokenism. Or there's no changes in policy or culture. This is like superficial representation without addressing structural barriers. Yeah, tokenism may be present. So here's some of the things that people, you're not racist. She has Black friends. She's not racist. She has Black friends. You're not like the others. You're one of the good ones. I can't tell you how many times I've been told that. So how do you correct it? Make inclusion meaningful. Ensure that people from underrepresented groups are not only hired or invited, but given resources and support and influence to make meaningful contributions. This is leadership opportunities and in fostering an environment where ideas are heard and respected. Revising and examining practices, pay equity, culture, and opportunities. And avoid performative actions, things like showcasing diversity for public relations and marketing purposes. You can see it, like, I can always tell when I see brochures, I'm like, oh, okay, that was the one Black person you can find to put in that ad. Foster long-term mentorship and career pathways, and ensure that diverse voices are represented at all levels. I mean, from the receptionist on up to the top. Take and listen to feedback and really listen to how underrepresented members of a group.
I'm doing listening to a Zoom. I'm listening to a Zoom conference.
Judy, can you? I'm going to mute you.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Educate and raise awareness. So this is education on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just recognize where tokenism might be occurring. Well, I clicked the link on there and went to the next slide. All right, so just to kind of sum up about what microaggressions are really about, in case you forgot, because that was a lot of information. So microaggressions are based on the simple and damaging idea that because you are X, you are probably not like Y. I'm just turning into an algebra point. So these biases are based on prior attitudes, first impressions, and socially constructed stereotypes. And it's important to understand why the bias is there and try to overcome it, mostly by learning from others. To change, you have to create positive interactions with people who are different from yourself. So healing needs truth, and until that truth comes, really healing won't happen. And healing's not really possible without accountability and integrity. So we all make mistakes. So know that if you witness a microaggression or commit one, this doesn't make you a bad person. But having unconscious bias and it doesn't make you a bad person if you have unconscious bias. It's just, but being imperceptive to these bias and negligent of their impact on other people is irresponsible. So we should notice our filtering and interrupt it. So a couple questions to ask yourself. What assumptions do I make about people based on their appearance? So understanding bias allows us actually to recognize ourselves. People tend to seek information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs and assumptions. And much of the time, these biases are an expression of a direct perceived threat. So when people feel threatened, they're more likely to draw group boundaries and distinguish themselves from others. And the first steps to eliminating the impact of this is being aware that they exist and that everybody possesses them, and then do the work to identify your own. So evaluate your mindset, be humble, and remember, no one is really better than anyone else. How do I react when I encounter someone who is different from me in terms of culture, language, or lifestyle? So people are meaning-making machines. At any one moment, our brains are absorbing and interpreting millions of bits of information about our surroundings. And so we create meaning from these data points, often unconsciously realizing that we are filling in the blanks with assumptions and stereotypes to organize people into boxes based on our own cultural experiences. So people tend to seek out information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs or assumptions. So you have to ask yourself, why am I reacting this way to someone who's different from me in terms of their culture, language, or lifestyle? Some biases are cultured and nurtured by how we were raised or the media we consume. And biases can be molded and contradicted. And then see, we do have a choice. So who are you surrounding yourself with? What media do you watch? What messages are you receiving? All of these are choices and they have an impact. So choose wisely. So when conducted under the right conditions, studies show that intergroup contact between people of different races or backgrounds increase trust and reduce anxiety that underlines bias. This is true when people get together. The goal of Free Your Mind is to inspire this mutual trust and understanding. The project aims to unify and strengthen community and transform people's perception of being different into a recognition of being the same as humans. Just another question for people to consider. Okay. So just going to invite you to think about a time where you recognize now, after this conversation, that you may have had some implicit bias toward a person or group, but that may have changed over time through your interaction with that individual. And so you have to think about what are the circumstances, how were you feeling, what were your thoughts in the beginning, and what happened to change your mindset. This is where to focus if you really want to have that change. Oh, is it? Hello. Do you want to go to the next slide? Oh, it wants me to play the video where I'm telling you these questions. There we go. I thought I'd changed all the GIFs, but I did not. All right. All right, so what is next for Free Your Mind? How do I go to the next slide? And it doesn't want me to do that. There it is. Technology, see? Just because I'm old doesn't mean. Okay, what's next for Free Your Mind? Like Zach said, I'm presenting a paper at the Textile Society of America. And that paper is going to be based on all the ribbons and similar to this talk, but really breaking down all 75 of the bias types. And there's going to be lots of I obviously can't talk all about it in an hour and a half, but there'll be lots of addendums and things for people to, and after it goes out, I will post links if anyone wants to learn more. And it will go to New Mexico for the American Folklore Society. I think I'm really excited about that because they believe that this conversation is related to folklore. And I'm like, wow, this is a real different way of thinking about it. And then how language becomes part of folklore. So that if we think about our biases as folklore and we want to change that conversation. So there's some really interesting scholarship around that I want to learn about. I'm also writing a book. I've spent a lot of time with that while I'm here at Touchstone. And I've identified a list of people I want to interview to share their own stories to add additional context to some of the ribbons. Sometimes you get the ribbons and you don't have the context, but I think I know what the person's saying. But then I'm using my own assumptions that, oh, this was written by a girl because it has, a heart as the eye and the things like that. So I'm trying to address some of that. And I already have a publisher for the book. I just got to finish the book, which I plan on doing this year. And I'm actively looking for new locations to install the work. And I'm applying for grant money so I can keep expanding the potential to drive societal change. And I'm building an interactive website to document the project, which has all the participant stories and the locations overlaid with census data so that you can see bias trends prevalent in local communities. And then the website will also allow you to virtually collect, for me to collect ribbons and just expanding the potential. I would love to see this to go internationally. So the website's a really important part of that. Okay, that is everything. I appreciate everyone sitting through this. I know this was a hard conversation. I know some of you might be like, damn, but I don't want anyone to feel that there's, like, this is a work in progress, right? I consider myself a work in progress because I am constantly learning things and realizing my impact on other people. And while I intend to do good, that doesn't always show up that way. So I invite you to look for that in yourself and see what you can, it's not better, but see what you can bring awareness to. Yeah. Okay, anyone have questions? I'm gonna stop sharing. Any questions? Anyone on the, hey, Carla, thank you for supporting this project at Touchstone. I really appreciate it. It's really hard to do this kind of work, and many people don't always recognize it as actual art, but I feel like there's an art to conversation, and I feel like there's an art to how people interact with one another. And so while this is social practice work and doesn't always get recognized as art in a traditional sense, you so actually supporting this actually enables this work to be taken seriously.
Well, you are absolutely welcome. We were really excited when we heard about the project. And I wasn't able to get out to meet you, but it has been phenomenal listening to your artist talks. And I submitted quite a few myself because after, multiple decades and multiple careers, you experience all the things that you have talked about in many facets. And I've had the opportunity to work with youth and older adults, and you see it so much. And I think these conversations are so important and this work is so important. So thank you for what you are doing with this project.
Well, thank you, Carla. There's a question in the chat. Will your book be an ebook? Well, it's likely going to be published by the Rochester Institute of Technology. So I think there's going to be a physical book, but I do believe they offer ebooks when the book is made available. And I'll find a way to have excerpts and PDFs and things like that, because I'm going to send it out for people to take a look at and give me comment and feedback. Okay, let's see what other things are in the chat. And in the room here, oh.
I'm going to post a link in the chat where people can share ribbons on your website.
Okay, great, wonderful. Thank you for doing that, Dean. Someone said, I will come away more awake feeling and I will bring that into my daily life. Thank you for your comment, Carol. That makes me feel really good. So yeah, for anyone, it will make me feel awake too later when I start feeling the insomnia. That's for sure. Anyone in the room?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
But can I ask you to talk about the emotional baggage of doing this project and how you're dealing with that?
Okay, so I'm an empath. So I feel very deeply. So I'm not gonna lie, I read ribbons and I cried. I read quite a few ribbons and was triggered. And that's why I took a spa day on Saturday. I do a lot of body work. I have friends that know that I feel everything in my body. And one of my closest friends is a massage therapist, and she hooks me up on a regular basis. I have to get rid of it. Sometimes I'll write my feelings down and I'll burn it. So it goes up in flames. So I do little spells for myself to sort of channel those things. In a lot of the work that I do, I have some cards up here, and some of the other images that you saw, that's my work, like particularly my work with zip ties. I might sit and pull zip ties for 8 hours and do several thousand zip ties. That repetitive motion allows me to really disappear that conversation and anxiety for myself. When I'm crocheting and knitting and doing embroidery, same thing. But when I'm doing it, and particularly something that is very harmful to me, I might really like with it, which is why I have this injury right now. This happened since I've been here. That just being present to that stuff. So it really does physically manifest in my body. And I really wish that wasn't the case, but it does. But thankfully I actually have my art practice to put it somewhere, because before I did, it was just in my body. I was in pain and didn't know why, and the doctors couldn't figure out why. This is because that's how I hold my stress. Yeah. So yeah, the emotional baggage carts is a series to get rid of emotional baggage, and there's lots of it. The stuff I carry is mostly racial trauma. I've worked through a good portion of it, so I don't feel like I carry as much anymore. But I'd be lying if I didn't have triggers, right? So someone will say or do something, or a microaggression will occur, and it will trigger, and all of that will flood back. And be like, man, I thought I dealt with this in therapy, but no, there's that trigger. It's right there again. So I don't think it's something we ever get away from, at least for me. If other people know how to do that, please tell me how. But it's something like I'm constantly dealing with it, but I can clear it away and feel really good. Like the very first emotional baggage card I made was related to all the deaths of people close to me during the pandemic from COVID, because at that time it was like before the first Christmas. There were no funerals, and I was going through the process of redoing my Christmas card list, because I always make handmade cards for my friends and family. And I was crossing names off the list. And it was the first time I was fully present to how many people I had lost, and it was 13. And I was all like in my feelings about it. So I started working on that weaving onto that shopping cart. And when I pushed it away, like I was done and I pushed it away, I felt the stress lift up through my head. Now I've done and tried to do yoga a million times, and they always say, lift up through your head, feel it lift through your body. And I never understood what the yoga instructor was talking about. I was like, what the hell is this? But when I pushed that cart away and actually felt that release, I was like, oh, this is something. I need to keep doing this. And so that's why I've made over 30, probably up to 35, like full-size shopping carts that have been woven on. Yeah.
Kudos on your animations.
You like those? Yeah, but I just learned that those are not ADA compliant, so. Like, I'm gonna have to redo them.
What are you gonna do with them?
The 5,000 ribbons. So now that they're all categorized, I've been talking to a number of fiber art guilds across the country. And I know that I've been invited to do something at Convergence in 2026. So I will probably invite other fiber artists to help me make a quilt. And so there have been a number of guilds that have said to me that they would like to take certain subjects and work on those subjects and quilt those together. So once these things are woven together, some of the words will be obscured and hidden. Then I want to go embroider. So some of the words I want to make permanent and embroider on top of that. So I have a feeling that the next phase of this project, turning them into this quilt, is probably going to take me at least 2 years. So starting in 2026, I hope by the end of the 20s, the roaring 20s, everything's that way. I was born in the 1900s, guys. So it's like in the 20s. I think maybe I'll have it finished by then. Yeah. I'm really inspired by the AIDS quilt. When I was young and my grandmother was still alive, we made panels for the AIDS quilt. We went to Washington, DC, and participated in that. And that I must have been, I mean, I was in my early 20s at the time. No, I was probably like 18, 19 at the time. It really had a major impact on me, seeing the enormity of this quilt, and then really being present to the impact on the lives of the people at that time. Like, you just see AIDS was something you knew one or two people, but to see this quilt all based with the stories of individual people, it was massive, huge impact on me. There was a question back there. Or comment? No?
I see Carla posted one last question.
What's this
I guess.
Carla saying? Every state has, it's not a matter of who has more bias. It's a matter of type of bias. So, and location. So if I'm at an art fair and I'm displaying this, like, so when it was in Miami, it was during Art Basel at the Standard Hotel where a lot of people were staying. And there were several activations and cocktail parties. So you imagine, it's a cocktail party, drinks, Art Basel, woo! And this thing is happening. So it was very specific types of art world type conversations that were occurring. And then in an inner city environment, very different conversations. The very first place where I ran this net, I ran it because I really wanted to capture the conversation around gentrification, but not the type of gentrification we think about. The gentrification of like wealthier Blacks in creative communities moving into a sort of Teamstery type neighborhood. Really, so I was like, oh, this would be interesting to see what's happening in this community. That's why I started it, to uncover that conversation. So that is a very unique conversation that is occurring on the net and the type of biases. So I would think the way to look at it is not like more or less, because every place has a lot, but the different sort of makeup of it. So if it's like a gumbo, you know, one might have more andouille sausage and the other might have more shrimp in it, you know, but it's all the same garbage in, garbage out. Any other questions?
I know it was a lot of data, so we are gonna post this recording because I think it would be helpful to watch it again. And I appreciate all of the suggestions, you know, at the end of each bias that you mentioned. So.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Thank you, online.